Next speaker is Dr. Abhishek Kumar. He'll be talking on pars planitis. He's Kumar is a prolific VR surgeon trained at Arvind Eye Hospital and presently the director of Lakshmi Netralaya at ARA. So on to Abhishek.
Am I audible and are my slides visible?
Yeah,
Yes,
your
sir.
audible slides are visible.
Intermediate uveitis is one of the most underdiagnosed uveitic conditions. It can be either due to the
Sorry to interrupt you, sir. Please switch the slide on slide mode.
Is it fine now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Intermediate uveitis is one of the most underdiagnosed uveitic conditions, either due to the inadequate knowledge of the examining ophthalmologist, or due to the conversion technique which the ophthalmologist thinks about indirect ophthalmoscopy. So to diagnose these conditions, we need to indent with scleral depressure, and that's why probably the most underdiagnosed one. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Vishal and the AIS for giving me this platform. No financial disclosures and nil conflict of interest. So, pars plana is a flat extension extending from the posterior part of the ciliary process to the ora serrata, and it is a 3.5 millimeter to 4 millimeter in length. And intermediate uveitis, according to the definition, is inflammation of the anterior vitreous, pars plana, and the peripheral retina. And pars planitis is utilized for that subset of patients in which there is presence of snowbank or snowball and in absence of associated infection or systemic disease. So after going through all these nomenclature, finally we settled on the term intermediate uveitis proposed by the intermediate uveitis group. It is not very common condition, and it is usually seen in the young adults, and out of total uveitis cases, it accounts for around 8 to 22% cases, and mostly it's bilateral but may have an asymmetrical presentation. Although it's not hereditary, but may have HLA-DR15 association. And the etiopathosis is not exactly known. There is an unknown antigen which brings the pictures of vasculitis. Sometimes the antigen in the collagen in the vitreous may act as an autoantigen, and in multiple sclerosis and sarcoidosis, it's an autoimmune etiopathogenesis. As already said, it's underdiagnosed, and patients might not have any problem. It might be just an incidental finding when we are examining the retina, but some of the patients might present with floaters, mild blurring of vision and photophobia. Pain and redness are usually uncommon. Conjunctiva might have mild congestion. Anterior chamber doesn't show much of a findings, but in cases of pediatric intermediate uveitis or associated with malignancy, they can have sometimes posterior synecdoche or scattered KPs in the inferior part. Vitritis is the diagnostic feature, and it typically ranges from trace to 4+. And as depicted in this chart, the vitritis is graded from 0 to 4+. On slit lamp biomicroscopy, we see the vitreous cells in the anterior vitreous phase, and there can be varying degree of vitreous according to the vitritis grade. And these snowballs are visible in the inferior retina, which are nothing but yellowish whitish opacities. They are not actually sitting on the retina, sitting away from it, and they look like an ant's egg. And on depressing pars plana, we can see these inflammatory exudates in the pars plana region, which are known as slow banks. And we can also see choroid retinal scarring at times. This is another picture showing the snowballs and the snow banking. And there may be presence of periphlebitis in the peripheral veins. The vitreous condensation sometimes causes degenerative changes, and there may be presence of posterior vitreous detachment and seething of peripheral veins, and the presence of neovascularization and like NVD or NVE, and traction can cause sometimes the retinal detachment. The most common cause of visual decrease in these patients is the cystoid macular edema. Nearly 70% of patients have do not have any cause, and it's an idiopathic variety. The second most common is the pars planitis, and followed by multiple sarcoidosis and multiple sclerosis. The infectious causes the universal diagnosis of tuberculosis or great mimic syphilis, and other causes like toxoplasma and toxocariasis. In case of sarcoidosis, there may be perivasculitis, and if the patient is not responding to our treatment and patient is having recurrence, especially in old age group, then we should think about the intraocular malignancies like the lymphomas. And there may be presence of granuloma in case of toxocara. So diagnosis is basically on the clinical findings and the tests which can be done like FFA. It is basically detect to see the presence of choroidal non-perfusion areas and the areas of perivasculitis and leakage, and also sometimes to detect cystoid macular edema. You can see the petaloid appearance here on the FFA and the cystoid spaces in the OCT. USG is done in cases of media opacities, and it helps us in recognizing the exudates over the pars plana, and UBM also helps us in recognizing the exudates and the cyclitic membranes as well. And USG can also help us in giving the grade of vitritis, whether it's severe or mild. The lab investigation needs to be tailored. So if the patient is not having much of a problem, we don't need to investigate. But if the patient is having visual decrease, then routine investigations like CBC, ESR, renal function test, and liver function test. And according to the diagnosis which we are thinking that patient might be having, it has to be tailored. Like sarcoidosis, we need ACE and CT scan lungs. And for syphilis and CAT/SCAS diseases, the various serological testing. Vitreous stab can be done, but it should be avoided because it might cause tractional retinal detachment. So it's better to go for vitreous biopsy. The various complications associated with it, most of the patients, as already said, have, lose vision because of the cystoid macular edema, and sometimes the chronic inflammation can lead to epiretinal membrane. The most common type of cataract is posterior subcapsular cataract, and it's basically due to the inflammation of the steroid being used for treatment. And also they get intractable glaucoma due to the inflammation. The patients might have optic disc edema due to the intraocular inflammation, and may present with optic neuritis also at times, but it may or may not be associated with multiple sclerosis. And there can be presence of neovascularization at disc or elsewhere, and features of vasculitis signifying the presence of ischemia. And retinal detachment can also be there. The various varieties like exudative or the rhegmatogenous due to dialysis at the snowbank, and also the tractional due to the presence of traction and due to cyclitic membranes and other membranes. The treatment is followed a step-by-step treatment, which was proposed by Kaplan. So if the patient is having mild decrease in vision, we don't need to treat. And if the patient is having vision worse than 6/12, then the first step in treatment is periocular deposteroids like triamcinolone. 0.5 to 1 ml is given. It can be in the subsenon space, and it can be repeated 6 to 8 weeks. If it is not, the patient is not responding, we can add systemic steroids like omnacotil or the prednisolone at the dose of 1 to 1.5 milligram per kg body weight. And the newer tablets like methylprednisolone. Still, if the patient is not responding, we can go for immunosuppressive. There's a very good talk on immunosuppressive, so I'm not going to detail. Cryotherapy is usually not preferred these days because of the tractional retinal detachment. And if the patient is still not responding, we can go for vitrectomy to decrease the inflammatory mediators and to relieve of various other pathologies. This is a patient. Nowadays, we have started using intravitreal Ozurdex, and the patient is not responding. Then we can go for clostridiol or acetonide. I'll just take 1 minute. And this is a patient who responded beautifully to intravitreal Ozurdex, and in patients who are not responding to steroid, we may go for newer drugs like infliximab or adalimumab. And it is important to address the various complications like glaucoma, cataract, and anti-VEGF for neovascularization or PRP and supportive treatment. So the take-home message is careful clinical examination in case of vitritis with slit lamp biomicroscopy and mandatory indirect ophthalmoscopy is important to diagnose this condition, and early treatment is needed to prevent dreaded sequelae. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhishek, for a wonderful presentation. So our next talk is by Dr. Deepak Agarwal, sir. He'll be talking on posterior uveitis. Dr. Deepak Agarwal, sir, is a trained VR fellow from Arvind Eye Hospital, prolific VR surgeon, and a director of Harihar Eye Hospital. So on to Deepak, sir.
Good morning, everyone. At this outset, I would like to thank Dr. Vishal and AIOC for giving me this opportunity to be here. Posterior uveitis is basically inflammation of the choroid with inflammation of the adjacent structures such as the retina, the vitreous, the optic nerve head, and the retinal vessels. So already clinical approach has been discussed, but it is important to have a good medical history because that will give us an insight into the etiology of the disease. For example, if the patient is having fever, malaise, cough, expectoration, it may point on towards tuberculosis. Travel history, a person who is traveling too much, there may be a suspicion of systemic of syphilis also. So a proper history has to be elucidated. Next, it is important to know whether it is a posterior uveitis or is it a part of a pan-uveitis, because that will also help. Because pan-uveitis, again, one must think of a Behçet's disease, whether it is a choroiditis, retinitis, or retinochoroiditis. So if it is a choroiditis, then one must suspect sarcoidosis or tuberculosis. If it is just a retinitis, an ARN or a PORN, a retinochoroiditis, for that matter, toxoplasmosis. So how do we differentiate? It is important that if we think it is a retinochoroiditis, the lesion will be more superficial with involvement of the retinal blood vessels. So it can be classified into infective and non-infective. The most common infective etiology being toxoplasmosis, toxocariasis, tuberculosis, syphilis, viral, and HIV-related eye diseases. And in the non-infectious group, we have a spectrum of white dot syndrome. So investigations has already been dealt with. So I will not go into the detail, but I'll just go on to the most common infective posterior uveitis, which we see, and that is ocular toxoplasmosis. And it is usually unilateral, and in 72 to 80% of the cases, it can be congenital. As you can see here, there is a punched out central necrotic zone, and this particular disease, congenital toxoplasmosis, actually does not require any laboratory investigation, and it is more of a clinical diagnosis. There may be an active lesion adjacent to a old scar called as a satellite lesion. Acquired toxoplasmosis, as you can see here, has a typical headlight in spot appearance, and it presents as a unilateral focal necrotizing retinochoroiditis. Vascular involvement may be there due to the antigen-antibody reaction, and this is called as styrylase arteriolitis. Management of toxoplasmosis basically involves use of drugs, which are usually which should destroy not only the cyst but trophozoite. But the problem is currently we have drugs which are targeted only to the trophozoite. So number of drugs have been implicated, like pyrimethamine and sulfadiazine. Other drugs used are clindamycin, pyramycin, and very commonly now we are using intravitreal clindamycin in a dose of 1 milligram in 0.1 ml. The next disorder is toxocariasis, and it is caused by an infection by accidental ingestion of larvae of the dog roundworm, Toxocara canis. And children who have pica and close contact with puppies are vulnerable. So it presents with peripheral or a posterior pole granuloma with traction retinal detachment, and it gives a picture of a chronic endophthalmitis. So these are the other presentations of toxocariasis. We can see whitish, grayish white granulomas. Confirmation of the diagnosis is by ELISA with the Toxocara excretory secretory antigen. Differential diagnosis in them one should suspect retinoblastoma, severe planitis, and juvenile idiopathic arthritis. In India, tuberculosis is endemic, and therefore one must suspect tuberculous posterior uveitis in cases of choroiditis. So tuberculous posterior uveitis can have a lot of presentations. The most common presentation being that of a disseminated choroiditis, where you see multiple small lesions of 0.5 to 3 millimeters within the deep choroid. So I'll just go onto the picture. So you can see here that this is a disseminated choroiditis, and there may be involvement of the adjacent retina leading to retinitis. There may be serous RD over here, lipid exudation also. There may be neuroretinitis along with a macular scar, along with disc edema. There may be the next presentation is of a solitary tubercular granuloma, and you can see here a hypofluorescent lesion followed by late hyperfluorescence. It may also rarely present as a subretinal abscess, where the lesion results from progressive liquefied caseation due to rapid multiplication of the tubercular bacilli and tissue destruction. This may eventually break into the vitreous cavity or even may cause ocular perforation. This is mostly seen in the immunocompromised patients as an HIV, or if the patient has been started on oral steroids without an ATT therapy. So one must also suspect sarcoidosis, syphilitic gummas when there is a solitary choroidal granuloma also. Tuberculosis also may present rarely as an endophthalmitis due to the rapid progression of the organism. And this again occurs because of treatment of steroids without concomitant antitubercular drugs. It may also present as a serpiginous-like choroiditis, where there is a progressive multifocal choroiditis along the blood vessels, or it may present as a plaque-like elevated lesion near the macula. There may be extensive peripheral vasculitis. Important point here is that it causes obliterative vasculitis along with the periphlebitis being confluent, whereas in sarcoidosis, the periphlebitis will not be confluent, there will be skip lesions. And it causes a lot of neovascularization. Again, the OCT may show a contact sign. The RPE and neurosensory retina may cause an adhesion between the RPE and the inner retina. So the next is viral retinitis, and in this ARN, we get to see that the triad of vitritis, arthritis, and periphlebitis, along with confluent peripheral retinal necrosis. Although the posterior pole is not typically affected. However, in PORN, one can see that there is necrotizing retinitis along with retinal whitening with sparing of the blood vessels, giving a cracked mud appearance. CME retinitis, again, there'll be again a brush fire-like extension seen in HIV-related patients and a pizza pie appearance. Syphilis again is a big mimicker, and it can present as a chorioretinitis, neuroretinitis, saltpeter retinopathy, optic neuritis. Anterior segment finding basically shows presence of roseolo, and in the posterior segment, one can see there may be a presence of choroidal granuloma in the posterior pole. It may present as RPE changes, a saltpeter-like appearance, and confirmatory diagnosis is by Trichoderma pallidum heme agglutination test, and it should be treated with long-term penicillin. HIV-related lesions may include pneumocystis carinii, PORN, atypical toxoplasmosis, cryptococcosis, candidiasis, and large cell lymphoma. DUSN again, entity caused by the worm, and it is usually unilateral. And a myriad of non-infective causes, that is multiple evanescent wide rod syndrome, APMPP, DUSN, Krill's disease, sarcoidosis. So basically, to conclude, I would like to say that it is essential to differentiate infective from non-infective etiologies. Infective posterior uveitis needs to be managed with specific anti-infective therapy and steroids. Empirical use of steroids should be avoided because this may lead to a devastation, as in case of tuberculosis and toxoplasmosis. Tailored investigation should be used to come to a conclusion. Intraocular fluid testing for PCR and antibodies in infective conditions is useful. It is essential to follow up all patients with posterior uveitis to look for complications such as CNVM, hemorrhages, or breaks. And if there is macular or optic disc involvement, it can cause irreversible visual impairment, and therefore treatment needs to be aggressive in the form of intravenous methylprednisolone. Thank you.